Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. If everyone can take their seats. Okay, welcome everyone to the 2024 CEER Customer Conference, where we'll be discussing how to deliver an energy system fit for all consumers. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based here in Brussels, the Brussels correspondent for the French International Network, France 24. Also senior writer for the website Energy Monitor. I'm going to be guiding us through today's conversations on two subjects which I personally care a lot about: energy and consumers and consumer rights. This is going to be, I think, a really elucidating conversation because of the time that it's happening. We are right now wrapping up a term that has been extremely busy for energy policy in the European Union because of President Ursula von der Leyen's Green Deal and the implementing Fit for 55 package. We have a whole slew of new regulations that now need to be transposed and implemented by national governments. And these new pieces of legislation are going to have a big impact on consumers. So today's talks are going to be a comprehensive exploration of this recently approved legislation, and we'll talk about how they can be optimally delivered for the EU's energy stakeholders. This conference will have three central pillars: consumer protection, consumer empowerment, and decarbonisation. And we're looking to at how we can balance those three pillars with a consumer-centric approach that addresses all of the challenges and opportunities of the European energy sector. Certainly we know we have seen our share of energy challenges over the past couple of years, but we also know there are significant opportunities, particularly when it comes to decarbonisation. We'll be discussing electricity, gas, and heating issues with a sharp focus on implementing and reinforcing consumer rights and the imperative to decarbonize residential energy consumption. This event is being held both here in person, for those of you in the room, and also online. We'll be taking questions from people here in the room. Unfortunately, the online is working only one way, but here in the room, you can ask your questions. If you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand and you will grab my attention. We're going to have three panels of 50 minutes each. There'll be three speakers on each of those panels. And this year, we're introducing one national energy regulator into each session to provide the regulatory perspective because, as I said, it's critically important because of the time that we're in. We'll have some opening remarks, and then we'll move on to the first panel, which will be about the new measures agreed at EU level designed to reinforce consumers' energy rights. That will be followed by a session on unleashing consumers' potential to drive the transition. And finally, we'll have a third session on paving the way for decarbonized household. We have a tight schedule, so I'm going to be pretty strict on timing as we go forward. So if everyone can keep your interventions brief, and also questions from the audience, if you can keep them as brief as possible, that would be great. So now, to get us started, I would like to introduce Ms. Annegret Grobel, CEER President, for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Dave, and welcome everyone to be here to the customer conference of CER, all the speakers and all the participants. I would also like first to thank the European Economic and Social Committee for their support in hosting us, and in particular Biber for inviting us here to this room. That is a great opportunity, and I'm very glad we have so many on-site participants here because as we all have learned, the discussions among us being present is often more intense than just via the video conference. Thank you, Dave, for agreeing to moderate our conference. I'm very happy for this. And as you mentioned already, we are now at a sort of crossroad. We have to implement not only the governments, but in particular also the national regulators and, of course, with the European level together, the new energy and environmental legislation and the climate targets, etc. And in particular, electricity market design reform, the energy efficiency directive, the new renewable directive, and of course the gas decarbonisation package, not to be forgotten. So here are cornerstones for a cleaner environment, and for this it is necessary that we all are supportive and active for the to push the energy transition. That is something that is very, very important for all of us. And then, of course, it is pivotal that we also include and indeed put in the center of all of this the consumer. Yeah, so this is what we want to look at here, and what we as regulators also look at very much. And of course, we are aware that there is a little bit of a tension after the crisis. Yeah, so maybe consumers are still suffering from high prices, from higher energy bills, and they may be even more risk adverse than in the past. At the same moment, we all know that without active participation of consumers in the future, the energy transition will be slowed down. And also we want the consumers to be active, to provide flexibility to the system. But of course, we are also aware that consumers should not bear any risks that they cannot bear. So I think it is very important here to see that there are some new instruments, that there are new mechanisms to protect consumers, not only in crisis situations, but also to define and to empower consumers to play a more active part in the energy transition. And this is the new legislation that we now have to implement. So that is something that is very important here. And this brings us back also to the role of regulators that I want to also say here, that we have to, let's say, overcome a little bit our crisis management mode, all of us, yeah, and go back to the longer term horizon, yeah, that we have with the energy transition and the targets. So that is very important. And for regulators, of course, this means basically to go back to the basics and the regulatory principles ensuring predictability, credibility and transparency in this process. Yeah? So to really support consumers in adapting to the new situation, and to be aware that there are different groups of customers, of consumers, so that we also fine-tune the situations there, that we are aware that some may need more protection and others are more agile and can probably benefit more. But we have to set incentives that in the end all can follow and no one is left behind. So that is something that we have as a principle in our Aspire system, but also in the CER strategy, which empowering the consumer for the energy transition. This is exactly what we now try to do also with this conference and with implementing the new legislation. As I mentioned, all of this for the regulation also implies that we know that there is a huge amount of investments needed. However, in order for the consumers not to bear overly costs, we as regulators also have to set incentives for investors and for operators to invest as efficiently as possible. Yeah? So this is a long-term perspective that we also have to bear in mind, and not to, let's say, do something in the short term which may hamper the long-term transition. Yeah? That is something I want also to manage, that we are well aware of the needs, but that we are well aware also of the importance of consumers, of not being overpaid or overburdened with risks. So this is now the general scene setting, and as Dave already mentioned, we cover all of these topics and for all the sectors in 3 panels. And first, and that is, we mentioned it already, so I don't need to repeat it. And now I would like to hand over to Baiba for as our keynote speaker. Please.
Thank you so much, Annegrethe Gröbel. I think our cooperation was quite a while already, in different formats and different levels. So I'm really pleased to welcome CEER here in European Economic and Social Committee, which is House of Civil Society Organizations. We are 329 different civil society organizations representing 27 member states in the European Union. I'm representing a section that is quite technical, I must say, transport, energy, infrastructure and information society. It was particular times, if you look at the COVID, it was particular times if you see at energy crisis. It's also particular times now when it's war situation, unfortunately. And we see that there are many turbulences, keeping in mind the transport. There are many turbulences in terms of energy, also regarding infrastructure, and we cooperated already with CEER. We asked your advice also on the, within the Belgian presidency, we were delivering opinion on the grid system synergies among different cross-border cooperation on the grid system. So there are many aspects we are working on, and I would like to go on 2 main points. First one is currently topical issue on market design, and another point I would like to raise attention is also consumer empowerment. On the market design, of course, it's true that energy affordability is one of the main issues of today's conversation surrounding the future of our energy system. And in light of the energy price crisis started late 2021 and also 2022, it became clear that there were areas where adjustments to the EU electricity market design were and are necessary to take into account the future energy landscape and generation mix. The war affected the prices of fossil fuels, especially gas prices, and the resulting increases were passed on the end consumers following the merit order. It was clear that existing electricity market structures was unable to keep electricity prices manageable for consumers and businesses, and we know many stories where consumers were suffered a lot, and also businesses, especially small and medium-sized companies. Well-functioning energy markets play a crucial role in pursuing all the basic objectives of a sustainable energy system, like security of supply, reasonable cost and prices, and climate neutrality. For our committee, it is crucial to underline that energy, including the infrastructure for transport and distribution, cannot be treated like any other commodity. So it is necessary to create regulatory framework conditions for future energy that guarantees both an environmentally friendly, affordable and reliable energy of supply and the right to energy. This also means that energy market design must take into account the requirements associated with decarbonisation. The European Commission proposed a reform of our energy market last year. However, it should be taken more steps to adapt market design to new reality, which requires the management of 3 objectives: sustainability, affordability, and security of supply. This is the new reality based on renewable energy with a growing role for prosumers. First, to grant an affordable energy supply in a structured and centered on renewable energy sources, The merit order system arrangement should be abolished and replaced with a model where electricity prices are based on their respective production costs. Secondly, in the context of a reform of the electricity market, liberalisation must be critically considered. The current crisis shows that liberalised energy markets are unable to meet our three objectives and do not create enough incentives and also investing security for renewable energy. It would be better to opt for a mix of liberalisation and regulation in order to combine the merits of the liberalised market with the lead of governments. To ensure affordable basic energy supply, the new market design must guarantee basic energy supply at regulated prices. Finally, consumers should be empowered by creating the right to share renewable energy directly. This requires that all relevant information must be clear and accessible so that they can fulfill an independent role in the electricity market as user and as a producer. The market must be organized to enable consumers who also generate their own electricity or other small market participants to benefit as much as possible from the electricity they generate themselves. On the part of consumer empowerment, we need to underline that energy self-consumption, energy sharing, energy communities, and other forms of prosumerism will be the lever for promoting the green and energy transition and economic and social balance. The energy transition will only be success if citizens and organized civil society are invited to become active drivers of it. The recent growth of decentralized renewable energy technologies has made direct participation in energy production and management more accessible. As a result, many community-led projects have been instrumental in the local development of renewable energy. The position of these actors in our electricity system should be made clear and regulated to encourage, promote, and enable people to become energy consumers. Despite more than 6 years passing since the introduction of the Clean Energy Package, energy communities and collective self-consumption remains marginalized in Europe's energy system. Recognizing the social dimension also in the context of combating energy poverty is essential. And we are shifting slowly from the term of energy poverty to energy affordability, because we recognize there are more and more social groups that are affected by cost of living crisis and also inability to pay in full their energy bills. And we need to support these vulnerable consumers and to generate and use their own energy or participate in energy sharing schemes that would reduce the social divide. Last year, during the third edition of our annual Energy Poverty Conference that we organize every year, we were developing and thinking about pressing issue of eradicating the stigma surrounding vulnerable citizens. We advocated for the establishment of centralized hubs for energy-related assistance. These hubs would serve as one-stop shops, simplifying access to resources and information to ensure that everyone, especially those in need, can easily avail themselves of the support they require. This year, 2024, in June, European Economic and Social Committee will organize the fourth edition of conference dedicated to energy affordability, looking at how to ensure an affordable and stable energy supply for a just green transition, while avoiding the neglecting of vulnerable citizens, households and SMEs. And the second issue, how EU institutions, EU member states and civil society organizations are responding to the increased challenges brought forward by rising inflation, international conflicts and the ecological transition. The conference will also concentrate on active civil society participation and the updated national climate, energy and climate plans that are submitted to the European Commission and that will be known by that time. So we would like to look at these plans and to look how member states are tackling with these problems. Considering how these are effectively putting Europe on track to meet its current targets while keeping energy at affordable prices. You are all invited, and most probably you will get our invitation from our side for this event. And we recently published also a report about women in energy poverty, because we see that there is also a gender aspect of energy poverty. So you're welcome to take a look in ESC 10 section website, where all the publications and studies are published, and the recent one on the gender aggregated data regarding energy poverty. So I hope it can be useful for each of you. There are many member states studied and looked at, so I hope it will be good reading material for you. Anyway, I'm passing the words to speaker and moderator to moderate the first session, and I would like to thank CEER for very good cooperation so far, and looking forward for the future.
Thanks very much, Baiba. In fact, we'll be talking about a lot of those issues in this first session, which is going to be devoted to the new measures agreed at EU level designed to reinforce consumers' energy rights, and also what best practices exist in protecting and helping consumers. So, in fact, what was just mentioned, we'll be talking about energy poverty, along with energy vulnerability, affecting all different types of consumers. We'll be talking about one-stop shops and how those will be set up going forward, and also protection against disconnections, something that became very, very important during the energy crisis that we've experienced in the past years. Let me introduce you to our panelists for this session. We have Guillaume Joly, who is Senior Sustainable Buildings Officer at BEUC, the European Consumers Organization. We have Barbara Steenbergen, who is a member of the IUT Executive Committee at the International Union of Tenants. And we have Liana Kozigo, who is Head of Legal and Consumer Affairs and member of Board of Directors and Ombudsman at CWAPE. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Guillaume, I'm going to hand over the floor to you first to give your thoughts on this topic.
Thank you, Dave, and hello, everyone. I will first start by saying that at BEUC, with a consumer perspective, we've been covering quite a lot of the directives from the Fit for 55, but I will only focus today on the Energy Efficiency Directive. And it's actually a good start for this panel, because it's also the directive where you can find the new definition of energy poverty. It was not the case up to now that it was defined at the European level. Some member states were pushing back on such a definition because they had a split approach. It was both, on one hand, a social, and on the other hand, an energy matters. Now that we have a definition, the approach will be more structured and more per essence defined. So it would be easier to define the needed policies and programs, because we know now on what we have to act, who is concerned. So identifying the potential beneficiaries of the policies and programs is quite something also, because you don't act half blind. Also, this definition will help identify the potential beneficiaries I've just mentioned, because you have the historic disconnection, the installed prepayment meters, the debts that piled up, and the owed consumptions. So that's something that will help identify the people you want to reach out. Also, what it will help to address is the upfront costs, because those upfront costs is the financial main barrier for low-income consumers to act on the energy efficiency of their homes. So that's definitely instrumental, because that's the main impediment for most of the households. And what the VED also includes, it's a national stakeholder platform, so that people start talking to each other to identify and support energy poor. So this is the first and main step in VED regarding energy poverty. Also, I would like to make a sidestep for 30 seconds regarding financing, just to set the scene of what's happening at the moment. The banking sector is basically failing into providing consumers with the green mortgages and loans, the green offers that we need to retrofit our homes, and the possibility to get funded is shrinking. Basically, because the conditions are becoming more and more dire. So it's happening at the time when consumers, to be empowered, need to be offered streamlined and easy to access and affordable offers to retrofit their homes. So it's a bit of a contradiction. So what could the financial settings be to actually ease the access to financing? Here, that's something we thought was really interesting in the EED, is the new role of the distribution system operators that evolved. The DSOs now are part of the obligated parties in the energy efficiency obligation schemes. So that means that for DSOs to be involved in energy efficiency programs and to have the member states ensuring that what would be addressed are the implementation of energy efficiency measures. So something concrete. The main thing as well in the ED was the fact that you have a ring-fenced effort on energy efficiency addressed to the people in energy poverty. So crossing the lines here, we think this can pave the way to the introduction and implementation of a financing vehicle that we think have a good potential for consumers, the on-bill schemes. Mentioned several times in the renovation wave documentation, in all the more or less all the directives, but to truly see on-bill schemes implemented, you need the regulatory frameworks to evolve. So to have an offer that would be streamlined, easy to access, and trustworthy for consumers, the complexity needs to be taken on board, because otherwise, if complexity is left on the plate of the consumers, it's going to be difficult to see anything implemented, basically. So just in 2 words, what are on-bill schemes? They are like microloans that fund energy efficiency measures and whose repayment are folded into the monthly bills. Simple and clear for the consumers, because it's easily readable. It won't address deep retrofit, because you can't really expect funding of that scale with this vehicle, but it's very relevant for medium-sized to low-hanging fruit efforts for consumers. And here for the DSOs, the main change would be that those on-bill schemes, the microloans, would be linked to the energy meter. That's how you make sure of the portability of the repayments. It's not linked to the individual, but to the energy meter. So that's where the changes regarding the regulatory frameworks are essential. Also noting that in the Energy Efficiency Directive, you have a third-party financing that is now opened via the Article 22. So this would be instrumental to address. Another aspect for financing and the on-bill schemes, as I mentioned, is that you don't have any upfront costs for households, but also the grants can be then coupled to this vehicle. Because up to now, what happens with the grants is that you have to, as a household, first invest, address all the costs, and then once the works are completed, you get the grant. This means that most of the public grants are just disbursed to the advantage of the wealthy, because the wealthy households can have that upfront money. So to avoid this, on-bill schemes could be interesting in the sense that once they start, once the works are completed, the grants can kick in and reduce the number of monthly repayments for low income. Actually, the solvability would be increased. Once this aspect of financing addressed for low income, you also have the question of trust in the contractors, the installers. That's where the one-stop shop can step in. It's not only a financial instrument, those on-bill schemes, it's also a full package for low income to benefit from. One-stop shops here would have the role to assess the needs at the technical level and to implement the work packages coupled with the on-bill schemes, so that as a consumer, you know how it's going to be funded, you know you're going to get the grants, you know how much per month you're going to pay, it's clear, and you know you can trust the person who are going to come to your home and implement the works. So it's a lot of green flags from the consumer side. Another point I wanted to raise is the introduction of alternative dispute. Alternative dispute resolution. I stopped on the R. Sorry. Alternative dispute resolution for all types of energy, including for district heating sector. A sector whose regulation and governance do need to be improved for the sake of consumer protection. And I wanted to, I don't know how much time I have left, but I just wanted to quickly mention the engagement strategies, because at BEUC we think it's an instrumental aspect. To engage with consumers doesn't mean you only raise awareness of the issues. You don't only communicate on the solution. People are quite aware there is an energy crisis. Consumers are aware they need to act, but they need to be empowered, and they need to understand that their behavior can change. And those engagement strategies are all those methodologies based on social science and on behavioral science that can lead to people to actually change their behavior. And that's needed. It's not only relying on communication, it's relying on social norms and competition, on reward, to understand how you can act together. That could also be gamification, for example. Those are just illustration, and I'm happy to share a documentation I compiled on how engagement strategies can act on energy efficiency and consumer engagement. And one last word on the ban of disconnection. Even if it is protective of consumers, it is also a strong indicator of a policy design failure on the housing side, where affordable, healthy, and efficient housing is missing. And this needs to be solved by considering the synergies that need to be built regarding the regulatory frameworks on the energy infrastructure on one side and of the housing stock on the other side. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Guillaume. Now, next, let's turn to Barbara for the tenant's perspective.
Thank you very much, Dave. My name is Barbara Steenbergen. I'm representing the International Union of Tenants. We are the only international organization representing tenants in the world, with 75 members in 45 countries. Many of them are based in Brussels, and I have the pleasure to head the Brussels office towards the institutions. First, let me also thank BayWa and CEER for inviting us. We are in regular contact. Now we see that it is on us to shape the energy markets. It is not top-down, it is now bottom-up. And it is also the expectation towards the consumers that they clearly say how and how far they are able to contribute to the new energy systems we will have here. And from my point of view, I will concentrate on one major piece of legislation, which is now nearly at the end, the Energy Performance Buildings Directive, because this is the piece of legislation which is affecting tenants the most. So we are talking about the energy efficient renovation of the housing stock. We are talking, of course, about decarbonisation, for sure. But as BayWa rightly pointed out, we are talking mainly about affordability. Why is that so important? Dear ladies and gentlemen, I know that you are all experts of rent law in the room, but I again repeat it. In 21 European member states, the cost of renovation can be fully passed on to the tenants. This is the rent law. So the landlord invests. That's good. It's an upfront investment, as Guillaume rightly pointed it out. But then afterwards, the costs are passed to the tenants by rent increases. This is the ugly truth. And this is, unfortunately, affecting the rental housing market and the residents and the consumers and the tenants very harshly, because most of the times the rent increase is not balanced by energy savings at the same amount. If this balance is reached, this has a technical term, it is called the housing cost neutrality. Again, the rent increase after renovation is fully balanced by energy savings at the same amount. That would actually lead to the situation which is fair for the resident, which would also guarantee that the energy renovation is done in a deep way, that really energy savings are measurable. Unfortunately, the reality is not like that. In only a very few of the cases, we reach housing cost neutrality. Unfortunately, the rent increases are most of the time higher, and you all know that from practical life, and I certainly know that you know it also from conversations with your friends, with your family. At a certain point, when you get the letter from your landlord that your house is going to be renovated, the apartment, you are in fear if you can afford to stay on in your house anymore. This is the truth. So this situation should have been picked up by the new Energy Performance Buildings Directive. I say this a little bit reluctant. The intention was good, and I'm not doing institution bashing. I think what we have now is better than anything what we had before in the Energy Performance Buildings Directive. Why is that the case? I think the ugly truth of gentrification, displacement, renovictions, it has been definitely recognized by the institutions that this is the reality. So they also tried for the first time in the EPBD, this is the abbreviation, Energy Performance Buildings Directive, they tried for the first time to integrate social safeguards for tenants and residents in the legal text. This is a big step forward, ladies and gentlemen. What is actually done there? All the social safeguards in the text, they are incorporated in the Article 17 for the specialists amongst us. In the Article 17, it is recognized that there are renovictions. It is recognized that there are vulnerable consumers. It is recognized that those consumers must be protected. So we have the words in the text. caps on rent increases. It is in for the first time. Protection against renovictions. It is in for the first time. And I think this is a big step forward. And I think what is also recognized by the institutions, that we have to start in shaping the market, because we are talking also about market design here, by starting at a certain point. The starting point with regard to the Energy Performance Buildings Directive will be the social housing sector. I think this is quite remarkable because, first of all, the social housing sector is paid by us all, taxpayers' money. So the social housing sector should be also on top of the list, contributing to climate neutrality and housing cost neutrality at the same time, because this is the major point. So it should be concentrated on the social housing sector, and there I think we will have good successes in proving that housing cost neutrality is possible. I think Guillaume, he already made the example of the on-bill schemes. On-bill schemes is the technical implementation of the housing cost neutrality. So, and this is in the text of the new EPBD. I do think we have to be quite, let's say, positive towards our member states. And I hope that the Council will accept the actual text of the Energy Performance Buildings Directive without any further changes. It has been a political fight for 3 years, whereas the Energy Efficiency Directive that Guillaume was talking about, it was, excuse my English, a piece of cake. The Energy Performance Buildings Directive was extremely controversial. We all know it. We had the big headlines in the papers: forced renovations. Will the old grandma be able to stay in their house, or will she be forced to sell it? That was the discourse we had. And what we have now, I think it's a balanced solution which can help all. It can help those who invest. It can help those who have also, I think, the obligation to contribute to the climate neutrality. And it can help those who cannot afford the climate neutrality to have access to funds and to be also on a level playing field. Because we were talking a lot, Barbara, about empowerment, right? Empowerment in the residential sector means that this is also participation of residents and tenants. It is not top-down, the landlord decides and the tenant has to pay. No, this is not going to happen in the future. So overall, I think what we did here at European level gives a lot of possibilities to the member states. I am extremely pleased, Barbara, that you are doing already in June a conference on energy affordability concentrated on the first national energy and climate plans, because this is the test. In those national plans, all these social safeguards for vulnerable households we have now in the recent text must be implemented. I say must. It's not may. It's all must. So it is very important that we follow up what is going to happen at national level in order, I think, to have a fair Green Deal, especially on the residential housing market. This as a start, and I'm happy to answer more questions.
Thanks, Barbara. Next, let's get a regulator perspective from Liana.
I'll just nuance a little because I have a double cap. I'm a regulatory authority and an ADR. And I will shift now to the AMD directive. So it will be not as close to those topics. Of course, I'm bringing you to another side of the big questions we're all looking at the moment. So the new MD directive is about to be published, or just published, and most of you may be thinking, if you haven't read it, what's in it for me? Well, I won't pretend myself as an expert. I did not negotiate it, and I'm a little further away, being in the Walloon region, to the negotiation. But I do believe I can provide you some insight, both from a regulator's and an ADR perspective, and of course a regional regulatory authority as well. One thing that struck a reader when reading the MD directive is that some lessons have been learned from the energy crisis we went through. Member States can now be allowed in crisis period to take specific protection measures. Obligation of proposing fixed price contracts is now provided. SMEs are not forgotten in the directive, as both supplier of last resort and protection measures are applicable to them. Consumer protection is extended to consumers for sharing energy, and vulnerable consumers are protected from disconnection. Now, when reflecting on what we experienced, this will allow clearly more active protection and quick response in specific crisis circumstances. Now, allow me now to take a little step back and reflect on some of that new framework, and more specifically consider it from a more experience-based best practice on site at the level of protecting consumer. The first element I would like to stress, and it's also very much underlined in the book CEER, Let's Aspire Vision for Consumer Protection, it's the following. Consumers will only be greatly protected if they're informed. It might seem a bit something really easy to say, but it's not. To spread information, you need transparency, accuracy, education, and accessibility. And both regulators and ADRs have a role in this respect. Now, a regulator will sometime have a PCT, will define trust marks for PCT, it will provide facts for consumers, or has in its general objectives just to protect consumers. We all know the articles of the directive. Moreover, a regulator will control the well-functioning of the market, including general terms of conditions and supplying contracts, monitor prices of contracts and offers, monitors disconnection and can intervene when these are later or abusive. Now, all of this contributes to accuracy of information. Now, give me an example of how to look at transparency for information and why it's important. Now, fixed price contracts must be offered now on the market by the MD directive. And as a regulator, we observed during the crisis, the first fixed price contract had first disappears. They're now back. But never forget that most price offers, and I'll just give you the example of the Walloon region in 2023, were more expensive than weighted average of price contracts and offers on the market. So if a consumer may find it easier to choose for such a product, he must be clearly informed of the global price he will be paying. His peace of mind has a price. Shifting to my ADR cap now, education. Let me just stress the importance of connecting with first-line field actors, social workers, first-line suppliers, GSOs, social housing, consumer organisations. The ADR only acts as second line, and this must not be forgotten. It is only when the situation is conflicting that we can come into terms, and no adequate response has been found to a situation. So the ADR must endorse a more general information role, supporting first lines, providing hand-on information, and is a way, among others, to ensure accurate and qualitative information to consumers. Colleagues mentioned one-stop shops, and let me call for one-stop shop covering all matters to increase accessibility. During the crisis, some faced difficulties in informing rightly consumers on energy efficiency, since energy efficiency is mostly separated to energy consumption and energy market questions. This is what we see with our one-stop shops. If we want transition to work and consumer to be well informed and be handed proper information, he must have all the information at a nearest point of contact and not run to different services. So energy efficiency goes together with energy consumption and energy generation, and it must not be forgotten. Now, you mentioned it, Annegret, no one must be left aside, and from a regulator's point of view, the regulators work in the general interest, and I mentioned it's the basics, has to ensure the well-functioning of the market and adequately protect the consumers. Now, in a more concrete way, No one must be left aside in directive, and we look at it as a little broader. SMEs, people involved with energy communities, sharing of energy, vulnerable consumers. I pointed all of these in the introduction. Now, I would like to recall that it is the work of a regulator to look at this, and this even in more specific tasks. We can point out tariff methodologies and structures. We know it's a very difficult issue, and we work hard on these issues, but no one must be left aside. We do have to work on energy transition, but also keep this in mind. The right balance between activating consumer and protecting consumer is a hard one to find. Accessibility of tools also and protection is key. Digital divide exists. Just look at Belgium. 1 person out of 2 is digitally poor, digitally vulnerable. And if tools are provided, we need to find the right alternatives to provide sufficient information and to all people. And it must be reachable. Now, aside, and it's a small digression, I must say reading the MD directive, I more specifically looked at all the articles on sharing energy and energy communities, and it's definitely not an easy one. Customer protection applies to private contracts outside the framework from being a supplier until a certain threshold, but having to be within a legal entity. I'm not sure how this is going to work out. Nevertheless, I can already share with you that defining a legal entity only is already a challenge at national level, not appreciating whether this latter complies. We can only appeal for some guidance on how concretely the AMD directive should be interpreted as to how consumer protection applies. If the right balance must be found, one would definitely appeal for simplifying administrative burden. Speaking from an ADR point of view, one should never forget an ADR is a door to one's right. It is as such key to consumer protection and central in providing fair access to rights and information. ADR are accessible, free of charge, help consumers understand their environment, and a path to alerting on dysfunction of markets too. ADRs have a power of recommendation, suggesting change in law or practices, and reinforce consumer protection and information. If accompanying the consumer in their recourse to rights is part of the ADR's job, the room for error and right to make a mistake should be part of protection. It is only too often you realise a consumer didn't know, didn't request his right, didn't act according to the rules, and this only by not knowing. As an ADR, I can only salute the outcomes of the directive on SMEs, as it gives them some protection over the crisis, both COVID and energy. SMEs were particularly vulnerable, facing difficulties in finding energy offers on the market or when facing financial difficulties. Going back to energy community and energy sharing, again with my ADR cap now, I must admit the opening to ADR for private contracts is not an easy one either. And clarity on who should play the role and when would definitely be appreciated too. Let me focus one more minute on more vulnerable consumer. The ban on disconnection is now about to be endorsed by EU law. The ban already exists in some member states, and it does in the Walloon region, and we are currently assessing the mechanism. Allow me just to point out some facts already we've seen in the Walloon region. Just for your information, in the Walloon region, only a judge can decide on disconnection. We saw, and what we saw in the market is actors deviating from the ban of disconnection mechanism simply by ending contract. What they do is an end of contract. They just give a notice of 2 months, and then the person is cut if they don't choose another contract. It is an easy way to avoid administrative and judicial costs for these actors. The indebtedness of consumer increases significantly since the judicial procedure takes longer than using other means, such as prepaid meters, for example, and risk exposure for suppliers is increased, reducing market attractivity. I'm definitely voluntarily being provocative, but should we ban disconnection or rather fight indebtedness? There's no right and simple answer to this, and an assessment of the new provision of the directive will be necessary once entered into force to assess its efficiency. One additional reflection on vulnerable consumers. If it is wishful to better target supporting measures, and we saw Belgium was quite good at this over the crisis, It must go together with automaticity of rights. Non-risk course of rights is a major course of worsening vulnerability on energy market. If you want people to be protected, reduce the burden and give them the right and the protection you want them to have. As a conclusion, I just would like to point out that if the AMD directive broadens the framework for consumer protection, other measures outside the sole energy sector are definitely wishful, such as the right to internet, digital education, the right to an ADR, an independent ADR, an obligation to market parties to take part in the ADR process, legally binding ADR conclusions and outcomes to contribute to an effective consumer protection in a continuously evolving market. And of course, energy efficiency is key on reducing consumers' exposure.
Thanks very much, Liana. Before opening the floor to questions from the audience, I did have a follow-up question for you, Liana, because I find it very interesting what you were saying about the disconnection ban. You seem critical of it, and it's quite interesting that utilities are getting around it simply by ending the contract instead of disconnecting. So what would you advise be done instead if that particular approach isn't working right now in Wallonia or elsewhere?
I'll be a little more nuanced, just and voluntarily. We're currently assessing the mechanism, and we're talking to judges, we're talking to utility companies, we're talking also to consumer protection organizations. What we basically see is that we can't protect the people rightly with the mechanism for the moment. Actually, the end of contracts is very immediate for consumers. They don't understand what happens to them. They just get a notice 2 months after they're cut. They get a letter, please choose another supplier, but then they don't quite know what to do. And we're already with a public that's already quite vulnerable. So getting an extra letter to act is already a difficulty. So it's better, I think, and when you discuss it also with judge, we're basically sitting in a balance between the right to energy that some judges point out, and they decide not to disconnect because they say right to energy has to come first. And then on the other side, utilities saying, yeah, but we can't end that forever. So we have this kind of, I'd say like paradigm on the market, and it's quite hard as a regulator to just kind of say, okay, it's the right mechanism or not. I'd rather say it is one step as a mechanism. It was one proposal in the Walloon region. We're quite critical of it, and we were quite critical of it when it was put into place, because it is increasing risk exposure. It is not helping the indebtment, and we see that indebtment of people is rather getting worse. But the right solution, it's a harder question. I think it's always easier to critic than to say that's the easiest way. We had a system before which was the prepaid meters. It was efficient. It had also issues. So it may be working at other solutions, definitely. But what we see today is that that ban on disconnection, the way it's done, takes A, very long, B, is a very hard procedures, etc. It's huge on people. People don't understand, and mostly they don't even come in front of the judge. So that's what we see. And judges find it really hard because they kind of go, yeah, why would I cut people from energy? So it doesn't work. But what's the next step? It's a tougher question.
That is a tougher question for sure. Guillaume, I also wanted to come back with a question for you about housing cost neutrality. So you mentioned the on-bill schemes. I'm wondering how that can actually be financed. That rollout requires some spending behind it, right? So how can those on-bill schemes be funded in terms of the rollout?
Well, in terms of capitalization, as Annegret mentioned, we need investors from the private sector to be able to step in, and we still need to think of the best vehicle. Here, it's not only a question of funding the works per se, but it's also funding all the financial instruments that we need. Besides, I'm thinking of the guarantee fund, for example. That could be the public sector stepping in. That could cover any case of default. Here you also have for the works themselves several potential sources. I'm thinking of green bond issuance, for example, but we could also think of the social climate fund. That could be a combination of the social climate fund with public authorities funding. It's also a way to address the issues for grants that are not from the national level, and even those grants might be complicated because the budget from the public authorities most of the time are annual. It's every year that they have to be voted. That's how it works in democracy. And so to address this issue, you could also think of a capitalized fund that would be multi-year instead of having to wait for each vote, basically, on the budget for grants. So that could also play a role to smooth out and iron out the difficulties public authorities have.
Makes sense. Okay, let's see if we have any questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question for our panelists? Looking around. Barbara, then I have a question for you, because I'd also like to ask you about the disconnection ban. So based on what we just heard from Liana, I mean, certainly it's complicated. In terms of solutions, what might you suggest? And I guess the basic question here is, if you always establish a safety net for a tenant that they know that they can not pay their bill and they're going to fall into that safety net and be okay, does that not introduce a kind of moral hazard where there isn't an incentive to pay your bills anymore?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, this is one of the jobs that we are doing at the tenant unions, the local tenants unions. When people are coming to us saying we are currently not able to pay our energy bills, we negotiate with the energy suppliers partial payments. So I do believe in the right to energy, definitely, because the right to energy is also the right to food, for instance. How will you cook for your children? Yeah? How will you warm your apartment? So it's a basic thing. According to our experience, you know what the people pay when they get their salary. First, they pay the rent, and second, the energy bill. This is what they do. So if you are not able to pay the energy bill, something serious has happened. Definitely, because the people are extremely aware of the fact that they might be evicted and that they might be cut off from energy. So this is our experience really from the ground, and we have nearly in every city in Europe we have tenant unions, and this is what I can report to you. What I also do say, you said the question to Guillaume, how shall we all finance this on-bill schemes, the housing cost neutrality, how can that be financed? This is such a huge investment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have several possibilities. For instance, we will have the emission trade system, and there will be revenues. And the question is, if those revenues cannot be used also for social and climate improvements. I think that would be a good deal for Europe. That would Europe not only make more green, but perhaps also more social. I also do think when it comes to the housing issue, and this is of course my key point representing the tenant unions, I do think at a certain point we have to think about a fund for housing from EU level. We do not have it yet. We have some funds from the ERDF, right, which can be used for housing. We have a little bit of Horizon, we have a little bit of InvestEU, but we do not have the big amounts. And we do know that the investment in the housing sector, especially in the residential housing sector, will have severe consequences for the consumers. It will cost, full stop. So the question is, if the EU is going that way, and we do not deny that this way is necessary towards climate neutrality, but it should be also balanced by social safeguards. And we do have new incomes, we do have new revenues. Why not think completely out of the box and say, okay, let's combine social and green together?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just on cost neutrality and on this specific sector of a private rented housing sector and the tenants' rights, at Burke, what we call for is a rent freeze if you have an implementation of the on-bill schemes, for example. A rent freeze over the course of several years, and that would be protective of the tenants. We could also add that some progressive administration also implemented a rent decrease, basically, because the rents are estimated as being too high. So that would also be protective of the tenants. And here the role of assessment by an impartial third party, by the one-stop shops, would be essential, because the situations of the tenants are different, so are the situations of the landlords. So you need to assess, like, were the last investment in energy efficiency 50 years ago or 5 years ago? The situation is totally different in terms of the spread of cost and in terms of equity, basically.
Leon, I wanted to go back to what you were saying about the ADRs and in terms of their role in conflict management. Why is it that you would not see the ADR as being the best tool for resolving conflicts within energy communities or energy sharing?
Well, the first thing is I don't know if it's the tool. That's maybe the way I'll put it. The big difference in energy communities and energy sharing is that we are, I'm not talking about residual energy. Residual energy, that's contracts we know already. But we're basically between private contracts between people. It's quite tough, actually, to see whether an ADR is, well, I'd say more an institutional sectoral ADR, is the right person or right institution to actually decide among two people. Should it not just be a local judge or a more commercial ADR? I don't know. I'm just putting the question on the table because this is really completely new to us. And up till now, we always said if we are under private agreements, it's the courts that have to actually look at it. So that is really a new measure, a new outcome of the directive, and we really don't know how to handle it. So it's more a call to, is that really the intention behind the directive? Is it that we actually, as energy ADR, have to look in private agreements to see whether consumer rights in the private agreement are compliant, yes or no? So maybe the Commission can answer this, I don't know.
We have commission people later on. Maybe we can try to get an answer on that. Guillaume, one more question for you before we wrap up this panel. Back to the take-up of on-bill schemes and how we get that out there. So we talked about the need for funding, some different ways that it could be funded. Interesting idea for the emissions trading proceeds to go toward that. That's one possible measure. How can regulators foster the take-up of these on-bill schemes by DSOs? What could regulators do?
I think broadly embracing who the regulators are. It's adapting the regulatory frameworks in terms of linking the loans, the on-bill scheme to the meter. I think that's essential. That's how it works in the US, basically, where the schemes are more broadly implemented. and also regarding third-party financing. And this is in the EED. That you can open financing of energy efficiency investment to third parties. So that would be the two main ways to open and pave the way to on-bill schemes, I would say. But also regarding regulation, it's not necessarily overspreading each regulator's work, but it's also taking into account the regulation of the housing stock. I think if we are to provide flexibility services as consumers to the grid, well, perhaps the grid could give some feedback and help us accessing energy efficient levels for our homes. So that would be a win-win.
I just have a question listening to Guillaume. He knows about it. I've spread it into his ear. You're mentioning one bill measures, and regularly on social measures, the Commission and the directives ask to get out of bill things. Why would the bill be the right tool?
Well, it might sound paradoxical and contradictory, but that's actually what consumer organizations also call for. Energy bills that are clearer and leaner and not embarrassed with all kind of taxes and levies that are not related to energy. Here, on-bill schemes that consistent because you don't only pay for the energy provision per se, and its distribution, of course, but also for an energy efficiency service. And maybe it's high time that the billing adapts to that as well.
Well, I think we'll wrap up that first panel there. Thank you so much to our panelists and to our introductory speakers. How about a round of applause for all of them? So we'll take a 15-minute coffee break now. Coffee is right outside these doors. We'll come back in here at 3:30 for session 2, Unleashing Consumers' Potential to Drive the Transition. See you back then. Okay, everyone, we'll get started in just a moment. If you could start making your way back into the room and take your seats. If you're on either panel 2 or panel 3, you can come take your seats up here. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everyone, from the coffee break. I hope you had some good chats outside, some good networking, discussing some of these issues that we've been talking about today. We're now going to start session 2, Unleashing Consumers' Potential to Drive the Transition. So in this panel, we're really going to be diving into how consumers can engage with all of these new regulatory changes that we have, how we can make consumers really parts of the conversation and how consumers can play their role in this big, enormous challenge we have before us in decarbonizing society and meeting the EU's 2050 goal of reducing emissions down to net zero. So for this panel, we have with us here today Stavroula Papa, a policy advisor with Rescoop EU. We have Rita Mota, who is chair of the Retail Market Design Working Group at Eurelectric. And we have Merit Siriana Herspeth, who is the sectional engineer in customer affairs and network regulation at NVERME from Norway. Thank you all so much for joining us. Stavroula, let's turn the floor over to you first for your thoughts.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Dave, and warm thanks to CEER as well for the invitation. I'm really happy to participate on the session on consumer empowerment, and I think it's a perfect fit to talk about energy communities. So in Rescoop EU, we represent a bit more than 2,250 energy communities and energy cooperatives around Europe that they then represent around 1.5 million European citizens that they are active in the energy transition. Just for some context or maybe some introduction, energy communities were actually already introduced for the first time in EU law with the Clean Energy Package, so back in 2018-19. And already back there with this package, the social elements of energy communes were recognized and their contribution to social acceptance of renewables, as long as their contribution and their potential to help on the ambitious targets that we have set at the EU level. So both on the renewables perspective and the energy efficiency. So there is a very interesting study because one of the questions that we normally receive is what is the potential of this kind of initiatives to contribute to the energy transition. So there is a very interesting study from CE Delft and one of the main on this potential. And one of the main conclusions is that by 2050, at least half of the European citizens could be producing their own renewable electricity. And this could mean that they could meet 45% of the total electricity demand by then. So we're talking about a considerable potential of such initiatives. And they also have a role to play on guaranteeing energy security. And on this regard, we have experience from a lot of our members and how they reacted in the context of the energy crisis. And for instance, we have the example of EcoPower in Flanders that managed to keep the prices low for their members, that they didn't get exposed to all these price fluctuations that we all experience in the context of the energy crisis. So I think also, as it was highlighted in the previous panel, that this was the main aim of the Commission and the institutions with a revision of the market design, exactly shielding consumers from those price fluctuations and from future energy crises. So in this, Jan already mentioned a lot of the different developments in the context of this market design revision. And of course, there are relevant developments for energy communities, including, for instance, the provisions on PPAs, power purchase agreements, and making sure that they're accessible to smaller actors. But of course, the new provisions and the definition on energy sharing. And just for some clarification, energy sharing was mentioned as a term in the Clean Energy Package. However, it was not defined. And there was a misconception created in some different member states between energy communities and energy sharing. So I wanted to clarify that energy sharing is one activity that can be performed by energy communities, but energy communities are legal entities, so an organizational concept where citizens together with municipalities, with small businesses, they collaborate on a lot of different activities. It can be renewable production, of course, it can be supply, it can be energy sharing, it can be flexibility services or building renovation. So we are talking about a legal entity that can undertake a lot of different activities. So now with the market design, it's an important development. Energy sharing is defined. It's specified who can engage in energy sharing. It is specified what are the rights and obligations of the participants, of system operators. And for us, it's also very important that it is stipulated that the Commission also has now a mandate to offer guidance on energy sharing and also on a level playing field for energy communities. So we really think that this is very important, since energy communities, and due to their unique characteristics, so their size, their non-commercial purpose, their main aim is not profit-making, the difficulties they face on financing and so on and so forth, they face some distinct barriers compared to other market actors. For instance, one of the main barriers, or the number one it might be at the moment that our members report to us, is having access to the grids. Of course, bureaucratic procedures at the national level to get permitting for their projects, and so on and so forth. Just due to lack of time, because we did a lot of work on specifically the topic of barriers, and in the context of a service contract with the European Commission, with DG Energy, we produce very useful reports, and you can see them now on your screens. One focuses on barriers and drivers for energy communities. No, it's the previous slide. Barriers and drivers for energy communities, and it focuses on production, on supply, on energy sharing, and flexibility. So feel free to have a look if you're interested on the topic. And then a reference guide document that we produce more to support initiatives on the ground to set up energy sharing initiatives. So I thought of what is the better format to share with you those kind of barriers. And I thought it's always best to share an example. So, and oftentimes we realize in this work we are doing in RescuPU with our members that there is often a big gap between the transposition of the EU provisions and the actual implementation and what is happening on the ground. So I will bring to your attention today this example from the case of Greece. I don't know if you've ever seen before a negative bill, but a negative electricity bill, but this is your chance. I circled the amount so that you can see it is minus 1,500 euros. And how did this come up? How did this happen? So in Greece, there is legislation for virtual net metering for some time now. There is legislation on energy communities since 2018. So a lot of initiatives are starting being developed to participate in the energy transition. This is the example of Common N, which is one of our members in the north of Greece. And they wanted to set up a solar project for self-consumption. So that should be pretty simple. They developed with financing from their members these solar projects. And then how it works according to legislation in Greece is that the supplier does the calculations of how much you produced and how much you consumed. And then in the end you receive a reduced bill because you are also a producer. However, it took, in this case, the supplier 2 years to do those calculations. So for 2 years, the energy community has electrified their project. They were producing energy, feeding it to the grids. They were continuing paying energy bills. And the solution and the outcome is negative bills. And they will keep receiving negative bills until the compensation happens for the last 2 years. So, of course, there is a lot of room for improvement on this framework, but it's, of course, a celebration of our members that actually their self-consumption happens and they will be able to offer reduced prices to their members. And maybe just to wrap it up for today, I think it is of vital importance now that the market design will be finalized, officially published, and then will need to be transposed at the national level. Member states will need to frame energy sharing legislation at the national level. It is important to keep in mind that there is a level playing field also for smaller actors to participate in this activity and energy communities specifically. And more generally, I would say it should be made possible for energy communities to share the benefits of their production with their members, either through supply, through energy sharing, through power purchase agreements. And we see a very vital role in this, in making sure that there is a level playing field towards regulators, because they also now have this legal mandate to monitor the removal of unjustified obstacles for energy communities and energy sharing. So, of course, they play a vital role into making sure that those barriers are removed and there is this level playing field I referred to. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. That is a hefty negative bill there. That is very impressive. Sight in the wild. Let's go next to Rita Mota for the perspective of electric utilities.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you first for the invitation to be here and with such a great fellow panelists, and also following a very good first panel as well. I think it has a good link with this one. So we do hear a lot about consumer engagement and active customers, but the truth is that this is something that it has been a big challenge in the hard to decode thing, and to overcome these barriers that exist on consumer engagement. So it was actually interesting, for instance, to hear Guillaume talking about engagement strategies and more than just communication. And the thing is that all the decarbonization efforts, all the transition, energy or digital transition we need to do, it's all meant for the consumers. So we really need to have consumers on board, have them in the centers, because otherwise this just won't work. So to get response from demands, we do need engagement from the consumers and a framework that also actually allows them to be engaged and to be active. And I think that we all agreed, picking on topic of energy sharing, this is a very nice tool to promote engagement from consumers and to allow them to be more active. And of course, because they have several benefits around it. They can have savings in their bills. They can be participating in their markets. They can have revenue stacking and value stacking of all these streams, of course. And this is possible, for instance, using their own flexibility, optimizing all their loads if they can. So this is something that we should try to untap as much as possible. But of course, it also implies overcoming some of the barriers. And I think that one of the main barriers is still about knowledge and awareness, indeed. It's about knowledge on which solutions are available, or about what to do and where to go, who to contact to get access to these solutions, even to compare the different solutions that exist. It's about knowledge, about knowing what existing incentive schemes are there in place, or even market solutions to ease financing, especially to address the barriers of affordability that were also mentioned in the previous panel. It's also about knowledge on really understanding the benefits they can have from these solutions and to take advantage of it without something super and over complex too burdensome for the consumers. So these barriers is something that Electric already identified. We did a study in 2021 called Power to People, which was actually looking at these kind of barriers. There were some interviews made to more than 2,000 customers in 10 countries in EU, and we really identified this as one of the major barriers for consumers. We are now launching a new study, and it will be interesting to see if there are changes in this awareness, also following the crisis that we have been living in the past few years. So the entities that should be engaged in providing and facilitating the access to energy sharing services, they have the role to detangle all this complexity. They have the role to make this simple to consumers. And we all need to be able to help the consumers navigate around and provide them a very similar experience to access all these kind of solutions. And these entities are suppliers and aggregators, of course, but they are also ONGs, local institutions, NRAs, municipalities. So we all need to have these joint efforts to combine to really provide this engagement from consumers. One other aspect that is very relevant is that energy sharing must be framed aiming at the maximization of social welfare. So the idea here is that we need to have a nice framework to avoid having consumer divide instead. This is something that we need to avoid at all costs. And today, of course, the most engaged customers are already those who didn't require that much effort to do so. They are the ones that are more digital literate. They are the ones that probably have more financial capacity. They are the ones who are looking more for the novelties, the early adopters that already engaged without too much effort. But consumers are not all the same. And in the other extreme, we have exactly those that probably have lower incomes, lower financial capacities, lower digital literacy, or even access to digital tools. So it's not the same. We cannot treat the consumers as the average consumer because the average consumer does not exist. We are all people, we are all different. So one of the things that we need really to address is how to make sure we are not just maximizing the welfare of a few at the expense of others and thus creating more consumer divide. Because in fact, if these frameworks are well implemented, it's good for everyone. Those engaging can access. Those that are not engaging are not paying more and should also have access to engage with this. But if this is not well implemented, we might risk creating even more costs to the ones that are not accessing this kind of tools and which usually are exactly the ones that are most vulnerable. So the maximization of social welfare also relates to two other factors. One of them is the performance and accountability of agents engaged in energy sharing, because when they do so, they also enter into other market roles and they need to be accountable also for those. The other one is on the collateral effects, which can be positive for the system, but they can also bring some other additional costs. And we need to avoid creating further distortions on this. On the first point, when we talk about energy sharing, which can be peer-to-peer, which can be energy communities, which can be collective self-consumption, it can be a lot of things, in fact. We need to understand that these agents are also engaging in roles as generators, as suppliers, sometimes even as traders, and depending on the choices made by member states, even as grid operators, because they might also manage their own grids. So we really need to make sure that even these entities are able to develop the sets of skills and competencies that are necessary to fulfill these kind of roles, or are able to partner with the entities that can help them to do so. On the point of the collateral effects, this can refer to situations of grid security. It can also refer to situations of impacts in a wholesale market caused by most secondary trading happening around with peer-to-peer transactions. So we need to make sure that we have the right framework and we are not here creating disproportionate collateral costs, either in grid investments or remedial actions from the grid operators, or even affecting liquidity and the well-functioning of wholesale markets. So three elements that we think should be considered with the implementation on energy sharing. So first of all is on the impact on retail activities, such as cost allocation, clear responsibilities, and information sharing, because we have to avoid inducing more costs in the system that will end up being paid by the non-early adopters of these solutions. Some examples are situations of increased costs for imbalances, or increased costs regarding previously hedged positions that are affected somehow with this energy sharing. The second point is on the implications of energy sharing on wholesale and retail markets, but also on the network distribution tariffs and how this becomes sustainable. And the third point is, of course, about considerations for customers regarding service quality, energy prices, and also consumer protection for both the consumers in energy sharing and those solely relying on the so-called traditional supply. By the way, Eurelectric should be publishing a paper on energy sharing between May and June. So we are also addressing these kind of things. And lastly, some practical considerations that should also be considered can be seen in the light of one article that also exists in the directive of EMD, which is about the possibility to have multiple supply contracts and energy sharing arrangements. So there are some practical aspects that need to be taken into account in terms of consumer protection, roles, and even responsibilities with other entities. Very simple examples are how to handle dispute settlements, how to handle debt situations regarding just one of the suppliers, because if we have a peer-to-peer, the person that is on the other side supplying is also a supplier. We need to understand how we handle situation of debt and how we relate that, for instance, for disconnection for debt, if the consumer is under two supplier roles. And these are just a few examples of things that we think should be well thought when implementing and designing this kind of framework, and looking forward for the discussion and for further questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. And for sure, this issue of the consumer divide and the concern that only the wealthiest consumers, most digitally connected consumers will benefit at the expense of lower income consumers is a big concern.
Yep.
And we heard that expressed many times as this legislation was going through these past years. Let's go to Merit next for the regulator's perspective.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I've been invited to talk about energy sharing and our model for sharing renewable energy production. First, I will go through the key points and background information to understand the model. Oh, thank you. And then I walk you through how the model works with an example. So can you take the next slide, please? Thank you. My key points. Two strong motivations for flexibility are high level of electricity consumption and spot-priced contracts. Norwegian households cover all their energy needs with electricity. We don't use any gas. A normal household consumes around 16 to 20,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. So the household consumption accounted for 31% of the total electricity consumption in 2023. In addition, 93% of household consumers have spot price contracts. So we have a lot of motivation. The three main pillars for the energy sharing model are that customers have the right to be connected, the right to receive electricity, and the right to deliver electricity. In addition, every household customer has to have a smart meter. And this is stated in the regulation that every housing unit should be metered individually. So we had a lot of data. And this data is sent to LHub, which is our data hub. This provides accurate and timely production and consumption data to consumers. So all the production and consumption at all metering points in Norway are stored in LHub. It is a national data hub for the electricity market. And then the goal and motivation for establishment of this model is to aim for equal opportunities for local energy production for single houses and apartment buildings. This is to facilitate local renewable energy production. I'm going to explain a little bit more about this model. Thank you. In recent years, there has been a large increase in the establishment of PV systems or solar panels that supply consumption of households. Houses and other buildings that have one metering point or connection point can use the production to cover up the entire consumption of their building. And in apartment buildings, each housing unit or apartment has its own meter and its own customer relationship with the network company and electricity supplier. So they have not therefore had the same opportunity to cover their consumption with production, because you cannot place, or some people can place their solar panel on the balcony, but you have a roof, which is a common area. So the model enabled prosumers to distribute surplus production with specific consumers, This sharing occurs through a financial settlement and facilitating virtual distribution of the production. So consumers involved in the model can decrease their electricity consumption from the grid without physically tapping into the production facility. So the shared electricity production is distributed among various measuring points via financial transaction, contrasting with physical electricity distribution. And then I'm going to explain by an example. So let's say 4 apartments on the figure decides to invest in solar panels and install it on the common roof. The production is measured in a meter, and the rest of the apartments have their own meter. They inform the DSO which meter is the production meter and which metering points are going to receive surplus production. And they also have to inform the DSO how the surplus production is going to be shared. And this can be done in 2 ways, either with divided equally between the metering points, or they can decide a share. In this example, it is 20, 20, 50, and 10% of the production. So the production is measured in 1 metering point, and the household consume is measured in their metering points. And then the DSO forward the production data and the consumption data to LHub, the data hub. And then LHub does this calculation where the production value per hour is split up and distributed to the household metering points. So then the apartments now have production and consumption values. And then these values are then sent to the DSO and electricity supplier for billing. Yeah, did that make sense? Sort of? Thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks very much, Merit. I just want to check first if we have any questions from the audience for the panelists. I'll come back again and check a little later. But Stavrula, I wanted to follow up on the transposition of the energy community's legal framework. I know that this has varied intensely between member states. I was just in Portugal earlier this week and hearing from the government there. They're quite advanced in the transposition and getting that recognized in national law. Other EU member states, we don't really see it, right? So what is the progress in terms of transposition of these EU provisions into national law across the EU, and why is it varying so much?
Sure, thanks a lot. We're talking about now the transposition of the provisions that already exist in the Clean Energy Package. And the deadlines were 2020, 2021. So we are many years after the deadline. What we see is that, as you mentioned, first of all, let me justify why there are so many differences. There are some countries that already had long tradition on energy cooperatives and citizen participation in the market. So we have the examples of Denmark, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands. They already had a movement, they already had a lot of energy cooperatives present. There were other countries, like more the eastern part of Europe and the Balkans, that this was a completely new concept that they then had to deal with and transpose at the national level. So maybe I can share some transposition trends rather than going one by one. For sure, a relevant resource on this regard, if you are interested, in Rescue.eu we have developed a transposition tracker tool. So with one of my colleagues, we have read all the national legislations and we have evaluated the progress of the transposition on the different elements. So some trends include the fact that several member states have actually started with this work and they have included provisions and defined energy communities. What is a renewable energy community? What is a citizen energy community? But there is some progress, but not considerable progress on the point of the enabling frameworks, because the directives specify that what should be transposed is not only what is an energy community. The member states should design an enabling framework for them to be able to participate in the markets without discrimination compared to other market actors. And just for you to understand what this enabling framework includes, it's specified on the Article 22, paragraph 4 of the RED for renewable energy communities. It includes the removal of unjustified administrative and regulatory barriers. It includes access to financing, access to information, making sure that also vulnerable households can participate in this kind of initiatives, and so on and so forth. So this is still a bit patchy, I would say. So there are some measures here and there, but not a complete framework that I can give you as a perfect example. Something that is also still considerably missing is an obligation that is introduced in paragraph 3 of the same article, which has to do with an assessment of barriers and potential for the development of energy communities at the national level. So this assessment has not, we see it as a first step for member states to understand what is their situation at the national level, what is the potential of such initiatives, what are the barriers they're facing, and based on this assessment, then to go through this enabling framework developments. But this assessment is lacking at the moment. I think only 5 member states actually started with or have drafted such an assessment of barriers and potential. And another interesting provision on the Renewables Directive is that the specificities of energy communities should be taken into account in the development of the support schemes for renewables. So the supporting measures that exist, or feed-in tariffs, or the different support measures that exist on the different member states. And we have actually several member states that took specific measures on energy communities, as is the case of Ireland, of Germany, that exempted energy communities up to specific thresholds from tenders, as is the case now recently with Italy as well, that introduced a support scheme for energy sharing and energy communities that develop energy sharing. So for more information on different countries, feel free to have a look on this transposition tracker, but I would say as a general remark that still work needs to be done. I have a point because several member states have already legislation, except for energy communities, also for self-consumption or virtual net metering or collective self-consumption. And I think it's important that now that new provisions on energy sharing are introduced at the EU level, when they transpose those new provisions, to not completely ignore what already exists at the national level, but take maybe the barriers that the actors are facing into account while shaping this new framework for energy sharing. And then, if I may, I also have a question on the Norwegian concept. I don't know if I should raise it now. Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot for sharing a very interesting case. We have noticed that one of the issues that exist for energy communities is the limited sustainable remuneration pathways for the excess production. So oftentimes in some member states, this excess, because there are normally windows of 15 minutes or an hour that you need to consume the energy, and then the rest, in some cases, you actually lose it. So you don't get compensated for it. Or there are, in some member states, caps into how much you can earn from this excess production. And if I'm not mistaken, you shared that the surplus production can be shared with other consumers through financial settlements. So maybe to explain us how it works, in a sense that you did explain already, but in a sense that so the household will actually choose specific other consumers that they want to share this energy with and get the financial benefits of it.
Yeah, I can try to answer it in a probably. Yeah, I'm going to try. So when establishing or saying the 4 apartments from the example earlier, they decide to invest, then probably they're gonna have a collaboration or tell the DSO that this production metering is not owned by one apartment. Probably it's something that the apartment building maybe are owning, and then when the sharing in the data hub or the distribution of the virtual production happens, then the production value in the metering point it's set to 0 once it's distributed. So virtually every apartment will have some production value. So say they have 25%, and then on the bill it will say if they have surplus production, so they have less consumption when the solar panels are working, then it could actually be that they are selling to the grid. They have to have a sort of agreement with their electricity supplier, so they have a spot price contract sort of. And if it's an area with what's it called? That they want the energy, like it's not. Sorry. If the DSO like appreciates the energy, then the tariffs will reflect that. So they can gain from selling, but the main goal is to consume and to use it. Yeah. Did I answer?
Yeah,
Okay.
makes sense to me. Rita, I wanted to go back to what you said about multiple supply contracts, because these can be complicated in terms of designing a framework for them. So what's tricky about those multiple supply contracts which are involving multiple suppliers, and what aspects should people be mindful of when designing that framework?
Yeah, so actually the directive doesn't say multiple suppliers, it says multiple supply contracts. And even an energy sharing is in practice a supply contract, because we are sharing energy with someone, so we are supplying energy to someone. So this is a supply contract. And the same for peer-to-peer. What are the challenges here? Well, first of all, if we have a consumer that has more than one suppliers, you have very basic stuff that already appear. For instance, let's imagine, usually, and we talked about this also in the first panel, if there is debt to a supplier, the supplier starts all the dunning procedures, but then after a certain time, it can require for disconnection of that consumer. Now, what happens if a consumer has two suppliers? If there's debt to one, if there's a dispute with one of the suppliers, what happened to that supplier or to that consumer if there is no other problem with the rest of the supply? For instance, if we have a situation where one of the suppliers goes bankrupt, or even if it's a peer-to-peer or an energy sharing as a whole, what happens about the role of the supply of last resort, so per se, to make sure that the consumer is not disconnected in that part? Who assumes that part? What about the payment of network tariffs? Usually, in the majority of countries in the EU, this is not true in everywhere, but in majority of countries in the EU, the supplier is the one responsible to pay the network tariffs to the grid operators. How do we allocate these types of costs between different suppliers, especially when we have fixed components, capacity components? Not everything is completely variable. How do we address, for instance, issues of switching? Usually we have switching for suppliers. How do we handle this when the consumer has more than one supplier? So, of course, it's not as seamless as it was. I think it's good to consider this possibility for having multiple suppliers and energy sharing as part of this supply and peer-to-peer as part of the supply. It's very positive, especially because it allows to take the benefits, for instance, on the situation where the consumer has some loads that are more flexible and they can more easily participate in flexibility markets. Some are more static. So it makes sense sometimes to differentiate these, even in terms of price structures that are applicable to these different types of loads. But of course, it becomes also a bit more tricky on how to implement. And it also means that usually this implies to have more metering points in consumers' houses. More metering points, more data exchange exactly around this split in the loads. So this implies also to have more meters, more infrastructures for data communication and so on. And of course, it doesn't come without costs. And we need to make sure that the benefits overcome the costs. And this becomes actually net positive for the consumers overall, and not bringing additional costs and creating more distortions to the overall consumers. So I think overall this is the main issues on multiple suppliers that we need to try to address and make sure that this actually works properly. Thank you.
It certainly is complex.
Yeah.
Merit, in terms of this model, I wanted to ask, who is it available for? So is it just for households? Can it be used for other types of energy consumers?
Yeah, it's a non-discriminating model, so households or non-households can participate in the model. It's limited or restricted to consumers within the same property, so you can have like one model on one property, and it's not restricted to a building or type of consumer. It is you have to have a smart meter, but that's regulated in Norway that everybody has to have a smart meter to access the data. Yeah, and that goes for households and non-households.
So, but in terms of they have to be in the same building, so let's say offices wanted to do it, it has to be offices within the same building, right?
Yeah, as the model is right now, but we're looking at expanding the model. We have, in January, I think it was, we made a report that made it more available for example, office buildings that are on two properties to maybe, if one building is more available for solar panels on the roof and the other one has more consumption on another property, then we were looking at how can they share with each other. So the solar or any other technology, if you want a wind turbine on your roof, you can have that as well, but probably won't stand. But in this model, you can share with within the same property, but we're looking at expanding it.
Okay, cool. So an expanding model. Definitely watch this space. Okay, well, we'll wrap up this panel there. Thank you to all the panelists. How about a round of applause for them? And so you all can take your seats, and I'll welcome up the next panel. So this is, thank you guys. So this is session 3, Paving the Way for Decarbonized Households. Please welcome here up to the presiding table, Geert de Blok, who is Secretary General of CEDEC, SEDEC. Then we have Melanie Bourgeois, who is EU Policy, Media and Campaigns Manager for Energy Cities. And we have Jane Dennett Thorpe, Deputy Director for Net Zero Strategy at Ofgem. Thank you all for joining us here. I think you're going to be here. Let's say yes. It's okay there, yeah. Okay, so Geert, let's start with you. Tell us basically your perspective on how we pave the way for decarbonized households.
Okay, works fine. Good afternoon, everybody. First to CER, thank you very much for organizing the conference on consumer issues and the different aspects that are being treated in the 3 sessions. And thank you for inviting us to share our thoughts on this specific session then on paving the way for decarbonized households. Maybe a little background on the organization I represent here. SEDEC is a European federation of local energy companies who are active in electricity, gas and district heating along the whole value chain. So local generation, grids and supply. Altogether we represent about 2,000 companies that have local authorities as shareholders. So the cities of Melanie Bourgeois are the shareholders of our companies. About 100 million customers overall are being served by these companies. These different activities probably then also reflect our balanced view on how we should get ahead at maximum speed to decarbonize the energy use of households. What we see is that in the different countries, there are very diverging starting positions for households. National circumstances and local circumstances can vary very strongly. So the national circumstances, national energy mix. Is there nuclear? Is there a lot of hydropower? Is there a strong role for natural gas? Quality of the building stock. Are there any energy efficiency standards in place? I just often take the example of Belgium, where until a decade ago we had about the energy efficiency standards of Greece, which is not ideal if you want to switch to renewable heating systems. The climate, of course, is different, and average income is very different between member states. Also, the local circumstances can determine what the starting positions for households can be. Are there different energy distribution infrastructures in place? Everywhere we have electricity grids. In many countries we have gas distribution grids. In many we have district heating, but not in all we have everything. Are there local sustainable resources available? Can be wind, sun as the evident ones, but water, geothermal energy, biogas, waste heat, is it available locally or not? What about the current heating appliances? Housing ownership is a big determinant in how the options are that you have as an individual. Is it mainly individual housing, collective housing, a lot of social housing, or not? So these local circumstances mainly will determine what the effective and cost-effective options will be for households to change their situation. No silver bullet is evident taking all this into account. Now, what can help consumers to make the change? Without clear political choices, it will be very difficult for them. Clear political choices, both on goals for decarbonization and timing. And these choices must be made, first of all, and then be unambiguously expressed. And then, once the political choices have been made, a new element that now finally has been introduced in European legislation is local heating and cooling planning. It's now part of the Energy Efficiency Directive. We would hope that this would go beyond heating and cooling, and in general would be for all local energy planning, including industry and transport, but that may be then a next step that we can get to in a next round of legislation. So with local heating and cooling planning that is organized by the local authorities in cooperation with all local energy distribution system operators. We see this as a starting point for determining what the cost-efficient options can be for households and industries, in fact. So electricity, gas, heat, they have to sit together, work together, look what the needs are, see what the options are in terms of local resources, and then offer clear perspectives, longer-term clear perspectives, both for infrastructure providers and for the households, and by doing so, they can ensure investment security. Very important, again, the background of our member companies helps here, is that we're convinced that an integrated energy system vision is absolutely necessary, and we regret to see there's still too much a single vision or an electricity will solve all the problems attitude, which we think will hit in the next years its limits. Including, so thinking across the whole value chain, not only think about the grids, of course, but what is possible in local generation, what storage options do we have, including for seasonal storage, What systems do we have in place for supplying the households? And all sustainable technologies must be taken on board. No exclusives when starting to make the analysis. That can maybe come in a later stage when you see what is possible or not. Then two last points on how can public authorities help. And talking about both national public authorities and local authorities, they must steer and support the investments that have to be made. Both, and in the first place, in energy efficiency. Energy efficiency in buildings should always come first before you consider the type of heating appliance that is being installed. It does not, for example, make any sense to install heat pumps in not well renovated buildings. That would only drive costs higher for households instead of helping them. It's very nice then that they have a green solution, but they will not necessarily make a lot of publicity later on when they see the bills arriving. So, and then a second stage, steering and supporting also concerning the most sustainable heating appliances. And yeah, that can be through fiscal measures. Their incentives will have to be given to convince people that in a certain given circumstance that is well fit for a certain appliance, they get the necessary support in the cases where they need the support, of course. It must be well targeted. All means will be limited, and so they will have to be well targeted. Direct financial support is another solution. Targeted information is also very important. Just as an example, these, I think in the program, the example of Vienna was quoted, which is a very ambitious planning they have, but there, besides a lot of other starting points where they have a very good position, we also see that there's a lot of direct financial support for all investments to be made in heating appliances and to convince households and buildings to make the switch, going up to 70% of the investment. So it's huge, the amount of money that has been put aside by the local authorities. They have put the money where their mouth is, which is something we do not always see. A last point, as this event is organized by the energy regulators, I have to say something about the energy regulators, always also sitting with an energy regulator next to me, and a bit from the grid perspective. We need regulatory support. It's not business as usual with a little change here and there. It's a fundamental change that we will have to go through as a society as a whole, but also at the grid level, where 80 to 90% of renewables will be connected with all the electrified use, be it in heating, for transport, for industry, will all have to be transported through the distribution grids. So there will be a need for addressing grid tariffs maybe differently. Certain financial parameters that determine the grid tariffs will have to be reviewed. And there I'm talking mainly about electricity, a very important role also for the NRAs on guidance. And then I'm mainly thinking about gas grids in those areas where decommissioning would be the best solution. Guidance also there will be needed. For the moment, in most cases, this discussion is being avoided, probably by all parties, certainly not only by the regulators, but we will need to have a very open debate on that after having determined, based on the local heating and cooling planning, where district heating is present, where it can be extended, where heat pumps are the best solutions, where gas grids can still be used with renewable gases or even with hydrogen, depending on the availability of local resources. So connecting the local needs with local resources is for us the ideal situation. Making use of the available infrastructures at a maximum, so that also for households, all solutions that we work out are in the end the cheapest possible, knowing that it is a very, very ambitious transition we have to work ourselves a way through. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Geert. Now let's turn to Melanie for a perspective from cities. At Energy Cities, you guys are working on making sure that cities are central to the transition. What's the role of cities in decarbonizing households, and what would you say cities need in order to speed up that transition out of fossil fuels for heating specifically?
Thank you, and thanks for having us on the panel. So I work for Energy Cities. We're a network of local authorities. Geert already presented us in one aspect. So we work with our members on fossil-free districts through direct conversation, direct discussions with our members, and also through EU projects. Today we are talking about consumers and how to decarbonize the building sector. One thing that comes out of the discussion we have with our members, our cities members, is that we need to stop public investment into gas and fossil fuel infrastructure, because what they're telling us is that they see that consumers will come to them because there is a huge risk that consumers will face spiraling costs, so that when we finance expensive gas infrastructure and at the same time we lower gas supply in some segment, operators will have to increase the grid tariff, and we can already see that in France, for example. In 2023, the French transmission system operators asked for 38% tariff increase to the National Regulation Authority. There was also a similar concern in Belgium or in Latvia. So the one that will suffer from it will be consumers that are locked into gas and that cannot move on, do not have the opportunities, the financial means to move on. So that's where cities come in, also because cities play a big role in having a collective way out of gas. They can do this plan to decarbonize buildings, not only their buildings, the municipal buildings, but also look at all the buildings on their territory, discuss this way out of fossil fuel in a coordinated manner with all the actors there. I'm talking about consumers and households, but also with the energy operators, with the businesses on their territory. So they have a role of coordinator. That's for me the main first point. Positive news is that on this planning aspect, the Energy Efficiency Directive has made mandatory for member states to ensure that cities, municipalities over 45,000 inhabitants will have to do a local heating and cooling plans. So we have a lot of members that have already done it, but in some member states they don't have this tradition of planning, and it's not something that they are used to. So at Energy Cities, we have done, very inspired by our colleagues from Rescoop as well, a tracker. So that's what you can see on the slide. We had a look at in each member states, what is the current status? Is there already an obligation for municipality to do heating and cooling plan? Do they have a legal mandate to enforce this plan? And then what kind of support do they receive? Do they have a good access to data? Are they supported financially or technically? So the countries in red are, of course, the one where there is a lot of work to be done in terms of supporting cities, but also having a good legal framework. So in support framework, I mean, we have a lot of countries in red, but we also have good examples. So we can also be inspired by these examples. We need to give cities appropriate mandate to local authorities. So we need to give them the mandate, to ban fossil fuel boilers based on their local heating and cooling plan. I'm saying this because we need to ensure that there is a coordination between the phase-out plans that the cities are doing in their local plans, and at the same time, the opportunities, the alternatives that are presented to consumers. I mean, it has to go together. And for this, local authorities also need to have a say in the grid development, working with the local, the DSOs. And at the same time, we need to support the local authorities in with technical means, with financial means, better access to data, because in most of the countries that are in red, one of the first steps that is missing for them is to access the data to do this planning. So if you go to the study with this QR code, you can read the details of our analysis country per country, and also our policy recommendations. So that's the big role of cities, and we will be very much looking at how this is transposed in each member state. So it's not a transposition tracker yet, but it will be one soon, because in the coming 2 years, the member states have to ensure that also in their national law, there is this notion of local heating and cooling plans. In another point, maybe the last one I wanted to highlight is that in the cities that we discussed with, we have one project called the Decab City Pipe that just ended. So the cities have done their roadmap for decarbonizing their local heating and cooling. We had cities like Vienna, Rotterdam, or Munich, and in particular the city of Vienna that was mentioned just before. They have this saying that in EU we talk always about technology neutrality, but what cities want is technology clarity. They want to know what will be available for them. Planning takes a lot of time. You need 2 or 3 years to make a plan, and then you need to implement it. So they don't want to be fooled by green gases or hydrogen that will after not be available for them in the planning that they made. So there is this tension that cities are highlighting, that they really want clarity in what will be available for them, and neutrality is not something that helps them to plan. So just 3 points to conclude. Local governments, they need to be taken seriously, because they have this role of coordinator to phase out fossil fuels, and also to ensure that no one is left behind, stuck into old fossil gas grids. And the local government, they need the support technically and financially. They don't all have the expertise today, and they need to become expert on how to decarbonize their buildings, but also all buildings on their territory. And we will be very much looking at the EED transposition for this. And finally, it's urgent to do so. We discussed with the city of Winterthur in Switzerland that is very well on its way to decommission its gas network. And the city councillor, Stefan Frischti, he advised other cities in our discussion to start quickly, because the more time you have, the easier and cheaper it will be. And this is something very important to tell to every city, but also to every member state, so they can support cities and understand that it's now that it needs to be done, because the planning takes time, and after we need to implement it. So, yeah, it's urgent.
Thanks, Melanie, very much. Okay, so I'll check again. Do we have any questions from the audience for the panelists? Yes, you can hit the microphone button there.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentations. I have a question to Melanie particularly, because it seems that we can still phase out fossil fuels without banning the boilers, because we can promote biogas and biomethane. Obviously the potential is smaller, but for some cities, particularly small cities, using renewable gas instead of fossil gas is practically realistic. We know that in Denmark more than 40% of gas is now biogas. Second of all, I don't know whether your research includes new geothermal technologies, because you know that Canadian EVER is now developing geothermal technologies that are helping getting the heat into the district heating. That's another solution, which also doesn't imply heavy investments while phasing out fossil fuels. Thank you very much.
Yeah, on the first question, I expected such comments when making this point. I think that on banning fossil fuel boilers, it will not be the case, and it will not be needed everywhere. But when a city makes a plan that in this district, and we're very much looking at the district per district approach that cities have, for example, in Rotterdam, if they say in this district the solution will be a collective solution such as district heating, they need to ban fossil fuel boilers in this zone to ensure that consumers will move to the collective solution, for example. So I think it depends what is the plan for each district, looking at the renewables solutions that are available, looking at the particular context regarding the buildings that are existing already and the infrastructure that are there, and then making this plan and being sure that they have the legal framework, the legal mandate to enforce this plan. And banning fossil fuel boilers can be one of them.
Okay, great. So let's go next to get the regulator perspective on this panel to Jane Denethorpe from Ofcom from the UK.
So thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here to participate in this panel, because I think it's the heat decarbonisation transition, particularly in homes, is the most wicked thing that we face. I think, you know, the idea that we've moving to low carbon electricity is really simple compared to the challenge that we have ahead of us. So it's really, really important that we all learn from each other and learn fast. So I'm going to focus mostly on heat decarbonisation, although, you know, decarbonisation in homes is wider than that. It's also self-production, and it's also electrification of transport. But for the reasons I said, I'm going to be really focusing on heat. And as Geert said, local circumstances matter. So I'll just talk briefly about those. In the UK, we've got legally binding 5-yearly carbon budgets all the way out to 2050, when we'll be at net zero. We've got a strongly devolved policy on heat and energy efficiency that is devolved into our regions or our countries of the UK, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England. But we don't have very strong municipalities in comparison to much of Europe. So they don't have tax-raising powers. They certainly don't have boiler banning powers. So that, I think, influences some of the structures that we have in place. We also have, not like the Norway that we've just heard about, we have 80% of our homes are heated by natural gas. So our biggest challenge here is the gas transition. And government is still thinking about what role hydrogen may have to play, at least in part, in some of that transition. And they have said that they will make a decision in 2026, and we are pushing them to make that decision sooner rather than later, because it impacts everything that we are planning, including on the electricity networks. We see our role is changing in this. It is changing both because, I mean, we continue to be the economic regulator and making sure that consumers' interests are protected. That remains our core duty. But we're getting new roles. New roles are coming at us thick and fast. We are becoming the regulator of potentially hydrogen networks, CCS networks. We're taking a role in designing the nuclear RAB regime. And we're going to have a role in regulating heat networks. So we're getting more things. But we've also got a new duty. We've got a duty to assist the delivery of those net zero targets. So arguably, that was how we've interpreted it recently, but now that is our legal duty, is to consider consumers' interests in meeting those targets. So I think our role as a regulator is absolutely critical in this journey. We're in a cusp of a transformation in consumer energy use. So therefore, thinking about our role and thinking about consumers' interests is really key. And I think we're starting to think, precisely because of this new net zero duty that we have, is to really expand our thoughts from beyond that kind of economic efficiency, but really to try and understand what consumers' interests are, and to also fold in some things around behavioural science and understanding really those consumer interests. And we need to be the proactive voice of consumers in this transition and to ensure that they are protected. But, you know, the regulator, I think my best point is the regulator is really key. We are a kind of an interface, a key interface between consumers, government and the industry. And to do that, we're going to need to regulate different things, and we're going to need to regulate differently. And so I'm just going to turn to two of those, the points that I think are really important as we're moving to decarbonising our homes. I'm talk about two themes. One is the traditional theme of regulators, keeping costs down. And the next one is to think about ensuring that the markets, and facilitating the transition through markets as well. But the other thing is around planning that we've heard about from both of the speakers as well. And I think both of those are key. So the first one is ensuring that the costs are brought down. I mean, this really is the grist of the NRAs. This is what we do all the time, but the circumstances that we're doing it in are quite different. We know that on electricity, huge investment is going to be needed. And we've been focused quite strongly to date on worrying about the transmission system as bringing that new power in. And we've got to start realising that actually a lot of this is going to be an electrified transition. So particularly for a country like the UK, which relies strongly on natural gas in its housing stock, that is also a transformation in the electricity distribution network. So, and we need to think about, it's not just about squeezing the last penny of efficiency out of the network companies, but making sure that we're delivering at pace, because that is also part of what is what needs to happen. And so we've just conducted a review on our regulatory framework, particularly around gas and electricity transmission, and we'll be looking at that again also for electricity distribution to think about what needs to change. And broadly, we concluded that for ongoing costs, our current arrangements are fine, but that for new investment, we need a swifter, faster process that's linked to strategic planning. So we also need to think about, as has already been mentioned, the gas transition. And we have said that we are considering how we get to pay back the existing investments much faster. We haven't made a decision on that, but it seems that if we want to protect those future consumers that's been mentioned, we are going to have to increase the costs and the bills on current consumers to make sure that those left on the network, those probably least able to pay and to put their upfront investment on, aren't unfairly disadvantaged. That's going to be quite a difficult pill to swallow, that's for sure, because we will be increasing near-term costs. And as I've mentioned, we've got this new role that's coming on regulating heat networks. And so we're, unlike where we're used to operating on gas and electricity, that are more homogenous networks, we've got a few of them, we're going to be thinking about regulating thousands of very heterogeneous monopoly providers. And that's quite a different challenge to the one that we've had to date. And government sees, so the UK doesn't have very much heat networks at the moment, but the government sees a move from about 2% of heat demand being provided by heat networks, which is where we are now, to 20% by 2050. And that's a huge change. So we've got to make sure that that is delivered, and it's delivered in consumers' interest, that we protect their interest in that way. And our approach is to make sure that they have equivalent protections to gas and electricity consumers. We've got no proposition to introduce a price cap, although if government wished to at a later date, it could do so. But that we'll be doing so on the basis of kind of providing clear information and transparency on the obligations and the pricing structures, and we will have the powers to undertake pricing investigations if we think they're necessary, and we'll have the ability to collect data and to determine a comparison methodology. So that's the approach that we're taking to regulating what was going to be undoubtedly a new challenge for us. So, I mean, that's my first point, is that we really need to make sure that we are keeping these costs down. And I think that is so important because we know that there are going to be new costs. It is an investment challenge, making this energy transition. But if we don't keep the costs as low as possible, we are going to lose that societal support and we are not going to make all our way to 2050. So the other point, the other 2 points I wanted to make was really around the importance of local planning that both of the speakers have spoken to already, and it's to make sure that those national policies align into the local circumstances and the local ambitions as well, to take on board the kind of technocratic perspective, but also the political perspective. And in this context, I mean, the UK probably has been on the outlier of forever sort of thinking about individual choice and market drivers. I mean, we all have a mixed approach of planning and market choice, but the UK, probably amongst the European representatives here, has been much more in favour of an individual choice. But few of the transitions in history have required such swift and coordinated action as the one we're facing now. And the heat transition in particular is a network problem, as been alluded to before. What other people do matters, and specifically what other people do locally matters. It matters a lot. We've proposed. I mean, so firstly, a while ago we've set up a new national energy system operator and planner, which is an independent public body, and they will be providing a spatial energy plan at a kind of national level. And we're also now developing proposals to have a regional energy strategic planner. And they will provide the kind of technical glue both between the national plans and the local plans and the ambitions and desires of local authorities. And they will also help us understand what networks need to be built, distribution networks in particular. So I think we don't have the answers, we're still developing it up. But I think the balance between where the individual choice will be and where planning is one of those critical things that we're going to have to keep testing and getting right as we're going forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, that when it comes to individual choice, yes, it's nice in principle, but actually for something like this, it matters what your neighbor is doing. It matters what your community is doing. And it's hard to do that at individual level. Geert, I wanted to go to a follow-up question for you. When we're thinking about the size of energy providers, right, and whether they're the big national companies or something that's more local, do local energy distribution companies offer advantages for households on this as compared to the more distant, larger ones?
Well, I think local energy companies are a bit lucky that the energy system is decentralizing, so the system coming their way. And then specifically in the type of companies I represent, where the local authorities are the shareholders, you have a direct link between those who have to organize the energy and climate transition and those who can execute it. Or, so to say, local authorities have their tools to act and their instruments to act. And households are indirectly the shareholders through their municipality of the local energy company. So this is certainly an advantage. A second advantage of local energy companies is probably certainly their knowledge of the local situation. So not only demographically, socially, but also being very much aware of the potential of local resources. They often are also responsible or part of the municipality, for example, for waste treatment, where it can be seen what the potential is from waste to energy. Wastewater, there are possibilities. There are mostly very good contacts between local industry and local authorities for waste heat, how you can involve that in your heat planning. This is certainly has advantages, and then they just have to decide how they get organized. And there's a lot of diversity. Vienna was quoted. It has the advantage of having made the decision a long time ago to have district heating being very well developed and being and the feed-in comes from waste heat, from waste management, and the heat coming from waste management. Other cities, I think it was mentioned before, and around Dijon, it's more regional. They have a lot of potential for biomethane. If you then reduce the demand for energy and then you try to fill up the residual demand with renewable gases instead of natural gas, that can be an option in some areas, but then you need some rural areas around this zone probably. And then I recently heard 2 examples on how do you organize with district heating as a local authority. Do you decide to give people the choice, voluntary, stepping into a district heating, even if it's in a smaller zone, with the consequence then as a local authority that you will have to finance the system in the first years when there's not enough people stepping in, or that you also politically decide that people have to connect to the district heating, which is not evident either. So, but that's something probably that a good cooperation between the political responsible people in the city, together with the companies that they run and own, can decide together what is the best feasible, knowing their population and their local environment.
Melanie, I wanted to come back to a question about your tracker, which is super helpful, I think, between that and the Rescoop tracker for the energy community's implementation. Lots for people to play around with once they leave here today. But can you tell us about the good examples? So you noted that most of the countries there were red, but I noticed that the Netherlands and Denmark were green. What is it that they're doing so well? Could that be replicated at European scale? And I wonder also what Jane was saying, that different European countries have different models in terms of how much power municipalities have. In the UK, they have very little power. In Germany, they have a lot more. Does that make a difference? How much political power cities have? Does that make a country more likely to be green on the map?
Yes, I think it makes a huge difference. The competences that the local authorities have, sometimes it will be more at metropolitan areas, so grouping of municipalities together. Sometimes it would be more at the regional level that these competences are. It doesn't matter as long as there is a local and a local vision of the resources and what Gert was saying before. We need a vision on what is at stake locally, what are how to engage all the local actors, and this is something they do quite well in the Netherlands, because they have this program Out of Gas. There are two reasons, among others, why Netherlands is green on the map. What they do well is this multi-level governance. So they have a national strategy, then there is the regional planning that should match this, comply with this national strategy, and the local authorities, they also have to comply with the regional strategy. So there is a discussion, to ensure that these different levels are working together. This is something that we see very positively, to have something coherent. Also, one of the main, there are 2 big issues for local authorities. It's to start the planning, at least, is having the skilled staff in the municipality or in the energy agency, that local energy agency that work with them. And in the Netherlands, it's very difficult to find good examples of how to increase the skills and how to have more competent staff on this topic. But if we have one, it's in the Netherlands, where there is one coordinator for heat planning, one position of heat planning coordinator that is financed for each municipality within this out of gas program. So this is great for the planning phase. Obviously, it will not be enough for the implementation phase, where they will need to really go and discuss with the people, with the businesses. So there we will need more people, but this was a really good first step. And on data, France has a really quite positive legal framework on this, because the grid operators and the fuel suppliers, they have the obligation to share their data publicly at the street level. So it's enable municipalities to have quite fine data to start this planning. And in addition, the regional, some regional agency, also the national one, and also the regional observatory, they are treating the data and organizing it so that it's easy for municipalities to start working with it. So this is two examples that I can highlight, that for countries that are in red, starting with access to data and staffing municipalities with the good competencies, or their agencies, if that's the way it works better. These are two good starting points for the countries that are in red, I would say.
Jane, on this same topic, given the political powers that municipalities have in the UK and don't have more specifically, what could be emulated from other cities around Europe within what they can do? And how much of a block do you think is it that they can't, for instance, you couldn't have a municipal boiler ban in the UK?
So I think it's probably not that much of a block right now, because I don't think municipal boiler bans would in any way be acceptable. In fact, we've got some examples from a recent attempt at a hydrogen trial in the UK, where actually what consumers were asked was, they were asked to make a choice between having a drop-in hydrogen replacement for their gas boiler or to switch to a heat pump, and they didn't like being asked to make that choice at all. In fact, it was one of the reasons, but not the only reason, why the trial didn't actually go ahead. But it was really highly contentious, and I think that shows, certainly in the current state of where we are, that it's about giving long-term certainty. That's the key thing. Where are we trying to get to in the long term, rather than kind of enforce something in the nearer term? But so I think, so one of the things that the UK is doing is certainly similar to the Netherlands example, about having the government is setting up heat network zones and is planning on heat networks, and is talking about having a heat zoning coordinator that's responsible. And so I think it's linking that up with their vision for place. It's not necessarily an energy vision, but how do they see their local development proceeding? How do they want their space to be? And that kind of political incentive. And I think trying to join that up, that's why we've kind of focusing on this, the regional energy system planner, sort of trying to make sure that there is some technical capabilities to inform and reflect those desires back into the energy system. So I think so that's on one side. And the other side is, of course, that the local authorities do have a role, both in social housing and kind of identifying and rolling out energy efficiency schemes for the least able to pay. So that's on another side of things. But I think we're a long way away from certainly any boiler bans, but I think both on energy efficiency and on heat zones, there will be powers and responsibilities for local authorities.
Okay, great. Well, that's all the time we have for panel 3. How about a round of applause for our great panelists here? And with that, I would like to invite Alejandro Uzurun to pass him the floor for some key takeaways from today's events. He's been here all day listening attentively here in the front row. So Alejandro is the head of unit for B1 in the European Commission's Energy Department.
Thanks, Dave. So, good afternoon to everyone. It's really great to be here. The afternoon has been great. Maybe I should say, first of all, some words of introduction. So I'm Alejandro Zurrun. I'm the head of unit for energy, so for local consumers, delete that. I'm the head of unit for consumers, local initiatives, and just transition in the Directorate General for Energy in the European Commission. Why I couldn't even say my title right? There is a reason for that. I have this job only for 4 weeks now. So, but be reassured, I'm not only alone in that important, very important responsibility. I'm accompanied here by Elena Donari, Massimo Serpieri, Naud Bart, and Monica de Volder. So those colleagues I'm sure you know very well from previous discussions, and we all together work on consumer policy in the energy area. So I'm really very happy to be here. I would like to thank the Council of European Energy Regulators, so many of you, for this excellent initiative and for having invited me to say a few words of conclusion of an excellent and rich discussion. So I'm not going to try to recapitulate everything that has been said here today. It was really rich. I will just try to touch on a couple of things which we find important, very important from the EU perspective. So, going to the substance. First of all, good news. If there is one takeaway from today's discussion from my side, is that together we are making significant progress towards a much more consumer-centric legal framework in the energy area, and a framework which ensures that consumers are better protected and better empowered to participate in the green energy transition, and that they are in a better position to benefit from the green energy transition. So that's very good. I felt a lot of, I wouldn't say consensus here, but I felt a lot of commonality here on how we go about reaching those objectives. Those objectives which, before coming to this event, I learned that are somehow reflected in the CEER BUC 2030 Aspire vision, which was actually something happened. We are all going in the right direction, but that doesn't mean that we are already there. The path is long, the path is difficult, and we have to go along this path together. And also, what the discussions today also reflected, from my perspective, is that there is a very good scope, a very broad scope for a broader cooperation between us, the European Commission, the European level, as well as the national regulators, you, and as well as the relevant consumer stakeholders. This framework, in a way, is set by recently adopted legislation, which almost all the speakers today, in a way, have referred to in one way or the other. And we obviously expect that this legislation will have a prominent and direct impact on consumer protection and empowerment in the context of the energy transition, when properly implemented and when properly enforced. And implementation and enforcement, I think, were also some of the key words that were said several times today. Step back, let's look at some data first and the challenges that we are trying to meet together. More than 40 million Europeans, according to our statistics agency, Eurostat, more than 40, so that's almost 10% of the EU population, were unable to adequately heat their homes in 2022. We have, therefore, a very important social problem there, which was already serious several years ago, but which has got a new dimension during the last few years, because we all, as European citizens, have been confronted with a very difficult period due to the energy crisis that we are all very well aware, with rising energy prices and their impact on the cost of living. Fortunately, and I think it was Liana Kosigu who said it before, it was a difficult situation, but fortunately, lessons have been learned from this crisis. And I think this is one important element that we have to take into account. Even when we have to deal with complicated stuff, we are able together to draw the right lessons and to talk and to take the necessary actions to deal with new situations that we didn't expect to be dealing with a few years ago. Again, the way in which we all in Europe have dealt with the crisis is a good example. We have been forced, or we had to find ways to deal with a situation that we didn't expect to have several years ago. And that is why we had to come up with a Fit for 55 package, for instance, that you all know, and which presented an integrated way of collectively putting together a number of support elements for vulnerable persons. And then, of course, the EU also came up with emergency measures during the crisis, and in particular the Repower EU plan, which were the main elements of the response of the EU to the crisis. Also, in particular when it comes to dealing with energy poverty, the European Commission, put out a recommendation on energy poverty and an accompanying support document, which is called Staff Working Document, where we gave guidance to member states to tackle this matter. And this guidance should be reflected in the very important work that member states are currently doing, revising their national energy and climate plans, which are a really important tool to ensure a strategic planning and implementation of our collective EU energy and climate framework. And I think Baiva Miltovic, at the beginning of our meeting, our gathering today, she referred to the importance of this, what we call NECPs, National Energy and Climate Plan, as the framework in which all the different strands of energy policy come together. And here, the role of regulators is crucial, of course. And in fact, prioritizing structural measures that address the underlying causes of energy poverty by empowering and enabling affected households requires a national and local governance, as well as smooth administrative cooperation between all concerned authorities. So, clear role for regulators. Other thing that the Commission has put on the table, one-stop shops. It has been mentioned during the discussion as well. We have heard from BEUC, and I was very happy to hear that, how important in this respect is that the Energy Efficiency Directive is fully implemented, and we're very glad to see that this essential tool has been given full prominence in the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Energy Performance of Building Directive recasts. We heard in this context as well about the phenomenon of rent increases for energy efficiency, which are often heavily put on tenants' shoulders, and this is something that we hope can also be dealt with this legislative framework. Another element which has been put on the table thanks to EU action is multiple contracts and business models. I won't go there. It has been mentioned by several of the speakers. Thanks to the electricity market reform, consumers will be able to conclude a contract with more than one supplier. And in this context, you, regulators, will be tasked with monitoring the actual conditions to enable consumers to have a fixed price contract, which should protect them from market volatility and allow them to enjoy essential domestic services. Then, and I can assure you, I just have two elements more in my long list of things that I wanted to flag from the European Commission perspective. One is energy sharing. Energy sharing is essential to make it easier for consumers to benefit from renewables. The Commission has facilitated this by providing the necessary legal clarity, defining roles, rights and responsibilities of suppliers, system operators, third parties and customers. For instance, consumers have now the right, or will have the right, to have shared electricity deducted from their total metered consumption for the purpose of calculating the energy component of the energy bill. And by the way, I was very happy to see the example of a negative bill that we saw earlier in the discussion. We are aware that there are challenges, and we agree that together with the promotion of energy sharing, due attention has to be paid to analyzing the impact on retail, to ensuring fair network distribution tariffs, and to guarantee high-level service quality and adequate consumer protections also in these schemes. So we are very keen on the concept, but we have listened, and we know that also there are some challenges that, for instance, Euroelectric put on the table there. And then, lastly, but not least importantly, protection against disconnection. This is very important and something that we are really particularly keen on. Vulnerable and energy-poor consumers will have to be better protected from disconnections, will be better protected from disconnections, both for gas and electricity, in all circumstances. Suppliers and national authorities must in fact provide measures to assist vulnerable consumers in managing their energy use and costs. Moreover, to guarantee continuity of supply for consumers in the event of a supplier failure and to ensure consumers are adequately informed, EU countries will need to have a supplier of last resort in place. Two key provisions. And for the two key provisions, regulators, again, will be called upon to play an essential role. Conclusion. I hope I'm not boring you too much, so this is like my 2 last minutes here. Conclusion. We have good news. By now you have gathered that I am very optimistic. I always present things in a positive way. So, good thing. We have a really, really solid regulatory framework put in place to deliver our 2030 climate and energy targets. And this has not been happy. There's been lots of very difficult negotiations, a lot of stakeholder interaction, and voila, we had, for instance, a very important vote in the Parliament yesterday and today, and this is like and by the way, most of it we had to negotiate during a very difficult crisis. So that has been a common EU effort of which we should be proud of. So we have the tools there, but the tools, some of them, they're still in a box, okay? And now we have to get the tools out of the box and use them correctly. So we need to focus on implementation. So not only, rejoice that the legislation is there, but make sure that it is properly implemented, it's properly enforced, and wherever possible, we also have to look at simplification, because having a lot of laws and a lot of provisions may or may not be good, but all of them have to be applied, and we need to make sure that this is done in such a way that the burden is the least possible for customers and for consumers. And for that, again, cooperation between the European level, between national regulators, between the broader consumer community will be crucial, will be fundamental. So together, we must join forces to make sure that the citizens will benefit from all that we are putting together at regulatory level. By the way, when I say together, one important element or one important part of this together is the local players, and I was very happy to hear from energy cities, for instance, and from other colleagues, how the local element is very important here. To end by coming back to the beginning, Baiba Miltovica at the beginning said the energy transition, at the beginning of our workshop today, said the energy transition will only work with the participation and engagement of consumers. I couldn't agree more. And of course, the energy transition will only work if it is fair and leaves no one behind, as it has also been said by many colleagues, and which I very much agree with. And then, and this is an important element I would like to say, because it was not so explicit in the discussion, but I will try to make it explicit. Our work is multidimensional, so we need to make sure that all the policy objectives, social goals, environmental goals, health goals, economic goals, are all achieved together in an integrated way. So from the EU perspective, we don't have to look only at achieving success in one area, but we really need to make sure that everything, and that is good, because the achieving of goals in one area does bring benefits and contributes to the achieving of goals in other areas. So I'm very happy that this event today brought us this element of commonality, of teamwork on achieving the two objectives, consumer protection and empowerment, and not leaving anyone behind in the transition. And the wrap-up sentence is very simple. Colleagues who are here in the room, colleagues or participants who are following online, you can count on the European Commission. You can count on us. The European Commission will continue with its engagement with all of you, with all the relevant stakeholders, certainly with energy regulators, consumer organizations, industry, local actors, because what we have ahead is a very important task, so the task is not done yet. We have a lot ahead to ensure secure, sustainable and affordable energy system. We will manage, but we will do it together. And by doing it together, by the way, so you are in Brussels here. I don't know where the people who are listening to us online are, but for those of you who are in Brussels, Brussels has this thing, that Brussels is a bubble. So everybody has heard about the Brussels bubble, and we are in one of the EU institutions. There are other EU institutions, and the EU institutions do a very important work. Well, it's not really right for me to say that, but this work is important, but it's a little bit like sometimes abstract, no? Like, okay, EU regulation, EU provision, EU guidance. But then what we heard today was the outside part of the bubble. What we heard today was real examples of implementations, of the challenges of making this legislation a reality for the people who should benefit from it. So we broke the bubble, and for that, I would like to thank you. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alejandro. I think that's a good way to put it, that right now we have the tools in the toolbox, but we actually have to use them. Otherwise, they're useless, right? And it can very much feel like we're coming to the end of something now. We're coming to the end of the term. We've passed basically all of the Fit for 55 Green Deal implementing legislation, but really this is just the start of a journey, because now that has to be implemented, now that has to be transposed, and I'm sure lots of people appreciate your commitment that the Commission will be holding the national government's feet to the fire, making sure they actually transpose this correctly and that they implement it. That will be really key in the months and years going ahead. So thank you so much, Alejandro, and thanks to all of you here in the room and also those of you who have been joining us online. I found this to be some really interesting insights into what we have to expect going forward in terms of consumers and in terms of how people can benefit from this huge raft of legislation that we've just seen go through. So thank you all so much for your attention this afternoon, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Take care.
And thanks a lot for the fantastic management of the meeting. Thank you.
Nice to see you, yes.
Thanks a lot.
It was well put, I thought.
Thank you. So, Dave, what's next for you?
Immediately next?
No, like in the week, month's term.
Well, it'll be election coverage.
Of course,
sure.
and that's